Karen didn't show her face for the next few days, which would have been peaceful if it weren't for the constant notes being slipped under my door. Anonymous ones. Some typed, some handwritten, all saying things like "your kind don't belong here," "you ruined the neighborhood," and "Karen was right about you." It didn't take a detective to figure out where they were coming from. The shaky grammar and perfume-stained paper gave it away. Karen was trying to play ghostwriter, but she was a little too predictable. I saved every note. Jake said they'd come in handy. And they did, because that same week, Karen made her next move, a petty, ridiculous, over-the-top power grab that somehow made everything worse and funnier at the same time. It started on a Thursday morning. I woke up, walked outside to grab the paper, and almost tripped over a 4-foot-tall fence. A brand-new temporary metal fence, with wheels, zip ties, and a giant laminated sign that said, "Private HOA property, entry restricted." The thing sliced through my backyard like someone had tried to separate me from my own pool. And taped to my gate was an envelope. Inside was an official-looking notice from the HOA, stating that due to pending investigations of noise violations and unauthorized aquatic activity, access to the pool area was now restricted for the next 30 days. It was signed by Karen, and, in smaller letters, the HOA president, Greg. I didn't even know there was a Greg. Until now. Jake came over within the hour. He read the notice 3 times, then shook his head. "She forged half of this. Look at the HOA seal, it's off-center. Can we sue her for bad alignment?" I asked. "Not yet," he replied. "But we can definitely sue her for trespassing, false documentation, and obstructing private property." I smiled. "You're enjoying this." "I haven't had this much fun since law school mock trials," he said. "Except this time, the villain wears real pearls and runs a dictatorship." We tried to remove the fence, but a neighbor warned us not to. Apparently, Karen had installed a motion-triggered camera facing my pool and sent out a mass email claiming any tampering would be considered an act of aggression. So we left it, for now. But we didn't leave it alone. Instead, I made a call to an old friend who worked in theater production. The next morning, a delivery truck pulled up with 20 giant inflatable gnomes, each one holding a sign. By noon, my yard had become a circus of protest. The gnomes held signs like "Gnomeland Security approves this party," "Pool Lives Matter," and "Karen can't swim anyway." Kids from around the neighborhood took selfies with the gnomes, and a local mom offered to bake themed cupcakes. It was hilarious. It was cathartic. And it was driving Karen absolutely insane. She called the police again. This time they didn't even get out of the car. Just rolled by, saw the inflatable chaos, and kept going. Jake had already filed a formal cease and desist against the HOA for harassment, and we were preparing a civil suit. But we needed more. We needed to expose Karen in front of the whole neighborhood. So we did what any normal person would do. We turned the next HOA meeting into an event. I handed out flyers titled "The Karen Chronicles," an HOA meeting you'll never forget. We invited everyone, residents, ex-residents, kids, even the mailman. We booked the same community hall but added some flair. Free lemonade, popcorn, and a small projector setup. The room filled up faster than I expected. People wanted a show. And I had one prepared. Karen entered wearing a scarf that looked like it had been dipped in gold paint. She walked like she owned the building. But this time, the board didn't look as friendly. Even Greg, the so-called president, kept glancing at the door like he wanted to escape. The meeting began with the usual announcements. Then came community concerns. I stood up with a stack of documents in one hand and a USB in the other. "I'd like to share a few things," I said, smiling. "Since our last gathering, several issues have come to light, including forged signatures, illegal installation of barriers, and inappropriate use of HOA funds for personal security systems." Karen coughed loudly. "This is slander. You can't." I clicked the remote. The screen behind me lit up with footage. Karen at my fence. Karen planting signs. Karen shouting into her phone about destroying that obnoxious splash zone. Then I handed out printed records, courtesy of Evelyn's folder. Documents with mismatched signatures, checks written from HOA accounts to Karen's personal contractor, and one particularly damning receipt $900 for aesthetic surveillance units, which turned out to be her creepy fence cameras. The crowd murmured. Someone said, "I knew it." Karen turned red, then purple, then a sort of blotchy pink. She stood up, wagging a finger. "You people are all ungrateful. I built this neighborhood. I enforced order. You exploited your power," I said. "And it's over." Then came the twist no one expected. The board chair stood up. Not Greg. A quiet woman named Marlene who had barely spoken before. She cleared her throat and said, "We've seen the evidence. This board votes to suspend Karen indefinitely pending legal review." Greg nodded silently. Karen gasped. "You're firing me." "You were never hired," Marlene replied. "You appointed yourself." The room exploded in whispers. Karen screamed something unintelligible and stormed out. This time, no one followed her. Later that night, I found a message taped to my door. Just 2 words, "You win." I wasn't sure what that meant. But it didn't feel like peace. It felt like a pause. 2 days later, the gnomes were stolen. Every single one of them vanished overnight. No signs of forced entry, no witnesses, no trail. Just 20 empty circles where inflatable warriors once stood. Then I got an email. No subject. No text. Just one attachment, a photo of the gnomes stacked in a garage, next to a pair of leopard print slippers. Karen had taken them. Jake wanted to press charges. I had a better idea. We filed a motion in small claims court for destruction of personal property, just enough to force her into public testimony. Meanwhile, I started digging into Karen's past HOA dealings. Turns out this wasn't even the first neighborhood she'd run into the ground. 3 years ago, she'd been president of another suburban development and had mysteriously resigned after residents protested her dog-barking curfew policy. A local blogger had written about it, calling her the suburban tyrant. I called the blogger. He answered on the 3rd ring and laughed so hard he snorted when I mentioned Karen's name. "I've been waiting for someone to take her down," he said. "Let me know when you go public." I did more than that. I gave him everything. The footage, the forged documents, the gnome story. He published it all in a piece titled "How One Man Beat the HOA's Reigning Queen of Crazy." It went viral. By the end of the week, Karen's name was trending locally. Memes popped up everywhere. Someone made a remix of her 911 call. A group of teenagers recreated her rant in a TikTok skit that got 3 million views. But the best part? The HOA officially dissolved its special investigative committee and apologized. Publicly, Greg resigned. Marlene became interim president and immediately reversed every policy Karen had put in place. The first thing I saw was Karen's face pressed up against my security camera. Her eyes were wide like she'd just discovered a crime scene, except the only crime happening was me putting a rubber duck on a pool float. Her mouth moved fast and furious, screaming something I couldn't hear, but I caught the universal symbol for "I'm calling the police," that finger stab on the temple followed by a dramatic phone-to-ear gesture. 30 minutes later, she really did it. Red and blue lights flooded my yard while the DJ was dropping the bass, kids were cannonballing like it was the Olympics, and I was halfway through blending a watermelon smoothie. I wasn't even mad. Not yet. That came later. First, I just watched, frozen, as Karen marched out to meet the cops with the confidence of a woman who thought she ran the government. She pointed at me like I was a terrorist. But when the cops walked past her, asked me to turn down the music, then turned back to her and said, "We need to talk to you about your call," that's when everything snapped. I didn't know yet, but that moment, right there, was the beginning of the wildest summer of my life. It all started with one simple thing: I wanted to throw a pool party. That's it. Nothing illegal. Nothing obnoxious. I even printed flyers for the neighbors, offering popsicles and sunscreen. It was my first real summer in this neighborhood after moving in during the dead of winter. I had no idea that HOA life meant you were always one beach ball away from war. The moment I set up the inflatable flamingo and turned on the speakers, Karen poked her head over my fence like a meerkat with lipstick. She didn't introduce herself, didn't say hi, didn't ask anything. She just said, "This neighborhood doesn't do noise." I tried to be polite. I told her it'd be a daytime party, wrapped up before sundown, no alcohol, no strangers. Just a few families, a couple of college cousins, and a lot of pool noodles. She stared at me like I'd confessed to arson. Then she said something I'd later realize was her catchphrase, "We'll see about that." At the time, I laughed it off. Everyone else on the block seemed cool. I'd met Tom and Julia next door, retired teachers who brought potato salad. Across the street, the Johnson twins helped me set up umbrellas. Even Mr. Patel, who always wore socks with sandals, waved and said, "Party hard." But Karen? Karen stood behind her hedges like she was waiting to file a complaint with God. The party kicked off just after noon. It was perfect. Sun blazing, music vibing, kids giggling, adults finally relaxing. I grilled burgers, someone brought a Bluetooth speaker shaped like a pineapple, and my cousin Jake decided he was the world's best bellaflopper. Every time he hit the water, half the pool exploded in waves. We were laughing so hard I nearly dropped my watermelon smoothie. But then I heard it. That nasal shriek. I said, "Turn it down." Karen was on the sidewalk now, arms flailing like she was trying to flag down a helicopter. I told her politely we had a permit, technically true since I'd informed the HOA weeks ago. But she didn't care. She pulled out her phone like she was summoning divine wrath and stormed back to her house, muttering something about delinquents and the end of decency. I turned the music down a notch, just to be civil. Big mistake. She took that as weakness. 25 minutes later, 2 police cruisers rolled up like it was a hostage situation. Everyone froze. My aunt spilled her lemonade. One kid dropped a popsicle into the pool and burst into tears. The DJ stopped the track mid-beat, and the Bluetooth pineapple crackled into silence. Karen reappeared on her porch, grinning like she'd just summoned a dragon. The cops approached carefully, scanning the scene like they expected beer kegs and passed-out teenagers. Instead, they found 6-year-olds in floatus, old folks in lawn chairs, and a boombox playing Taylor Swift. One of the officers asked me if I was the homeowner. I said yes. He asked what the party was for. I said, "Summer." He blinked, then chuckled. Then his radio crackled, and he stepped aside to talk with dispatch. That's when Karen stormed in. "Are you arresting him?" she barked. "I told you there was illegal activity, minors drinking, obscene music, and one of them," she pointed at Jake, "mooned me." Jake raised his hands. I just did a cannonball. Maybe your eyes got splashed." Karen wasn't amused. She demanded someone be arrested. She kept shouting about safety, neighborhood standards, and the sanctity of Sunday afternoons. One of the officers asked, "Do you have any proof of underage drinking or lewd behavior?" Karen snapped, "I don't need proof, I know what I saw." That's when the officer pulled out a small notepad and said, "Did you knowingly make a false report to 911? Karen blinked. "Excuse me." He repeated the question, slower this time. Karen looked around like the world had tilted. "I'm not the criminal here," she cried. "They're corrupting the community." A second officer stepped up. "You made a serious accusation. We reviewed the scene. There's no sign of crime. That's called false reporting." Karen's face went pale, then red. "This is outrageous. I'm calling the mayor." "You already called the police," the officer said dryly, then added, "Turn around please." Gasps echoed through the yard. I thought someone had dropped a microphone. Karen actually tried to back away, like they were bluffing. But they weren't. The handcuffs clicked, and she shrieked, "You'll regret this. I know people. I am the HOA." Someone in the back clapped. Then a kid yelled, "Is this part of the party?" And just like that, the tension popped like a balloon. Everyone laughed. The cops gave me a nod and said to enjoy the rest of the day. Karen, meanwhile, was escorted down the driveway, still ranting about bylaws and calling for legal backup. Later that evening, I checked the footage. Karen had been sneaking around the edge of my fence with a measuring tape and a decibel reader days before the party. She was looking for a reason to snap. I didn't know then, but this wasn't just a one-time thing. Karen had history. A long, embarrassing, extremely illegal history of harassment, fraud, and control. And I was about to be the guy who took her down, one cannonball at a time. Because the party wasn't over. Not even close. Karen thought she was the law, but she just called the real law and got herself arrested. And me? I had an entire neighborhood ready to finally fight back. This wasn't just about a pool party anymore. It was a revolution in flip-flops. The aftermath of the party felt like waking up after a storm passed. The inflatable flamingos still floated lazily across the pool, the paper plates fluttered around the backyard like fallen leaves, and the remnants of potato salad were cemented into the grass. But no one talked about the mess. Everyone talked about Karen. My phone was blowing up with texts from neighbors I didn't even know yet. Some just sent clapping emojis. Others sent screenshots of next-door posts titled things like Karen gets cuffed at family-friendly pool party and HOA queen loses her throne. By Monday morning, the entire block had taken sides, and it wasn't hard to see which side most people were on. I was still trying to make sense of everything when I got a knock on the door. It was Officer Miles, one of the two cops who had shown up at the party. He was off duty now, wearing jeans and a t-shirt with a donut logo. I offered him coffee, but he waved it off and said he didn't have much time. He just wanted to talk about Karen. I figured you should know, he said, lowering his voice. This wasn't the first time she's called in fake emergencies. She's known at dispatch. We call her Code Karen. I blinked. That's not a joke. Not even a little, he said. Last month she claimed her neighbor's dog was a feral wolf. Before that, she said the mailman flashed her. That guy's 63 and walks with a limp. She's a serial fabricator. I leaned back, stunned. Why does no one stop her? Officer Miles shrugged. HOA protects her. Her brother's on the board. Some residents are too afraid to speak up. Most just hope she gets bored and picks a new target. Looks like I'm the new target, I muttered. Not anymore, he said, and then gave me a look I didn't quite understand. You hit a nerve. And now she's exposed. I didn't know what to make of that, but I appreciated the support. He left with a smile and a wave, and I was left staring at my quiet pool, wondering what came next. I didn't have to wait long. The next day, a girl around 12 or 13 showed up at my front door. She wore a hoodie 3 sizes too big, mismatched socks, and the expression of someone who hated the world but wasn't quite sure why. She introduced herself as Lily, Karen's granddaughter. Before I could say anything, she blurted out, "I'm not like her. I hate her too." I stood there, mouth slightly open. You what? She made me come here, Lily said, crossing her arms. Said I had to apologize on her behalf to fix her image. But she also said to tell you your party was immature and trashy, so I guess this counts as both an apology and an insult. I tried not to laugh. Well, tell her I accept her apology and also don't care about the insult. Lily smirked. Cool. Do you have juice or something? We sat on the porch drinking apple juice while she told me stories about growing up in Karen's house. How every TV show had to be educational. How sugar was banned. How she got grounded once for using the word cool. She hated living with her. Her parents were out of the picture, and Karen had custody because she bullied the court harder than the lawyers. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened. It was weird. Here I was, sitting with the next generation of the woman who tried to shut me down, and all I could think was how lonely she sounded. Before she left, Lily said, "She's not gonna stop, you know. She thinks she's the HOA queen. But she's also really paranoid now. Thinks you're spying on her." That gave me an idea. I pulled up the footage from my security cameras. They covered the pool, the yard, the fence lines. I hadn't watched all of it yet, Just the Karen arrest moment on repeat. But when I started scrubbing through the day before the party, I found something strange. There she was. Karen. At night. With a flashlight. Measuring the distance from my speaker setup to the property line. Writing something down in a notebook. Then she climbed on top of a bucket to look over the fence again. She was obsessed. I backed up the footage more. Same thing, 2 nights before. Except this time she brought a decibel meter. The kind professionals use for sound checks. She stood outside my fence for 12 full minutes, logging sound levels. It was bizarre. The next HOA meeting was in 2 days. I decided I was going. When I walked into the community center, it was like stepping into enemy territory. Karen was already seated at the head of the long fold-out table, surrounded by the other board members. She had her arms crossed like a principal waiting to scold a student. A few residents nodded to me, some whispered. A couple smiled. I sat near the front and waited. The meeting dragged for half an hour, talking about shrub height guidelines and communal dog poop stations. Then came the open comment section. I stood up, cleared my throat, and said, "I'd like to share something with the board." Karen leaned forward. "If this is about your party, we've already reviewed it. And we're issuing a formal warning for noise disruption and violation of event protocols." "Actually," I said, pulling out a USB drive, "this is about your behavior before the party. Specifically, your trespassing and surveillance on my property." There was a collective inhale. Karen's smile cracked. I handed the drive to the HOA's secretary, who plugged it into the projector. The footage began playing. Karen, with her flashlight. Karen, with her notebook. Karen, with her sound meter. Karen, climbing a bucket like a burglar trying to steal peace and quiet. The room was dead silent except for the audio feed, Karen muttering to herself while writing things like illegal noise monsters and threat to order. Karen shot to her feet. "This is a violation of my privacy." I said, "Actually, it's your violation of mine. My cameras are on my property. You were not." One of the board members, a tall man with wireframe glasses, cleared his throat. "Karen, is this accurate?" Karen stammered. "I was conducting a sound audit. It's my right as HOA lead." "Was it approved by the board?" She didn't answer. The room erupted in murmurs. I sat back down, my heart thudding. The board said they'd review the evidence and discuss next steps. Karen stormed out of the room. I thought it would end there, but later that night, I got an email from a neighbor named Evelyn. She said she was on the HOA board 2 years ago but resigned because of Karen. She also said she had documents that could change everything. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop the next morning. Evelyn looked tired. Worn down by years of fights she hadn't wanted but couldn't avoid. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of old HOA records. Votes that didn't match minutes. Signatures that looked forged. Expenses logged under community improvements that were actually for Karen's personal security system. "She's been bending rules for years," Evelyn whispered. "But no one had the guts or proof to challenge her. You have both." I looked at the folder again. It was thicker than I expected. This wasn't just about a pool party anymore. Karen had buried herself in a pit of her own paperwork. And I was holding the shovel. I thanked Evelyn, walked out of the cafe, and called my cousin Jake. "Remember when you said you wanted to use your law degree for something fun?" I asked. He laughed. "Are we suing someone?" "Not yet," I said. "But it's gonna be a wild ride." And just like that, the pool party war turned into a legal revolution. The day Karen's house was officially listed as sold felt like a neighborhood holiday. No one threw confetti or popped champagne in public, but you could feel the relief in the air. People walked their dogs a little slower past her driveway. Kids giggled freely while riding their bikes near her fence line. It was like someone had lifted an invisible fog from the block. The house sat vacant for about 2 weeks after she left, blinds drawn and porch light flickering like a ghost still lingered inside. Every time I passed by it, I half expected her to pop out from behind the bushes holding a clipboard and yelling about leaf blowers violating quiet hours. But it never happened. The Karen era was over. At least, that's what I thought. I should have known she wouldn't go quietly. It started with a podcast. A neighbor sent me a link one morning with the message, "You're not gonna believe this." The title of the podcast was Suburban Scandals, the HOA Queen Who Was Silenced. The guest? Karen. The host introduced her like she was a misunderstood visionary who had tried to save her neighborhood from chaos and was now living in exile. Karen, in full voice, went on about how she had been bullied, betrayed, and framed. She described me as a party tyrant and called Jake a law school dropout who weaponized gossip. She even claimed the inflatable gnome army was a psychological operation designed to destabilize her. The comments section lit up with both support and disbelief. Some people laughed. Others genuinely seemed to think she had been wronged. I didn't know whether to be angry or amused. Jake was both. "She's trying to rewrite history," he said. "Classic Narcissus move." I shrugged. Let her talk. The truth's already out there. Still, it didn't feel right to let her have the last word. So I called up the blogger who had covered her first downfall. He jumped at the chance to do a follow-up. This time, it wasn't just about Karen. It was about neighborhood resilience, legal justice, and how one ridiculous pool party turned into a community uprising. He published a piece called "The Fall of Karen: How a Pool Party Sparked a Neighborhood Revolution," and this time it wasn't just local. National outlets picked it up. A few even asked for interviews. I declined most of them, except for one live video interview where I simply told the story the way it happened, straight and calm, no exaggeration needed. The truth was already wild enough. After that, the Karen podcast disappeared. No explanation. Just gone. Rumor was she had received a cease and desist from multiple neighbors for slander. I didn't dig into it. I didn't need to. I had moved on. And I had one final thing left to do. The pool party had started everything. It had caused chaos, police visits, arrests, lawsuits, and national attention. But it had also brought the community together. People who used to stay behind closed doors now waved to each other. Kids had more freedom to play outside. Families talked. Neighbors helped each other. So I decided to host one final event. Not a party. A celebration. I called it the Reunion Splash. Invitations went out with a note: no theme, no speeches, no drama. Just good people, good music, and a lot of water. The RSVP responses poured in faster than I expected. People offered to bring food, speakers, decorations, and even a professional photographer. The vibe wasn't loud or wild. It was warm. Like we had earned this moment. The day of the party, the weather was perfect. Clear sky, soft breeze, sunlight that kissed the water instead of boiling it. The pool shimmered like it knew this was the grand finale. Tables lined with homemade dishes stretched from one fence to the other. The DJ from the original party returned with a playlist that included every genre and a surprise remix of Karen's infamous scream, auto-tuned into a beat drop that had the whole yard laughing. Tom and Julia brought their famous potato salad. The Johnson twins had a lemonade stand set up with tips going to a local animal shelter. Mr. Patel, for the first time, ditched the socks with sandals and jumped into the pool fully dressed, causing a wave so big it knocked over a watermelon table. It was perfect chaos. Controlled, joyful chaos. Halfway through the evening, Jake raised a cup and said, "To community," and everyone raised theirs in return. No one mentioned Karen by name. But we all felt the absence. The silence where her shouting used to be was its own kind of music. Just before sunset, Lily returned. She looked different. Taller. More confident. She said she had been living with a cousin now, far from the neighborhood, and was thinking about writing a book one day. She wanted to call it Raised by Karen. We all laughed. Then she got serious and said, "Thanks for standing up to her. You didn't just help the neighborhood. You helped me realize I wasn't crazy." That hit deeper than anything else. It reminded me that while most of this had felt like a ridiculous HOA soap opera, real people had been hurt. And real healing had started because someone stood up, even when it felt silly, even when it meant becoming a meme. As night fell, we lit paper lanterns and sent them into the sky. They drifted up slowly, like floating hopes, carrying with them all the tension and absurdity of the past few months. I watched mine disappear into the stars and felt something settle in my chest. Not victory. Not revenge. Just peace. The next morning, I walked through the yard, picking up cups and plates, shoes left behind, a lone pool noodle that had drifted into the flower bed. It felt like cleaning up after a wedding or the last day of summer camp. Bittersweet. Final. But full. Then I noticed something at the edge of the yard. A small package, wrapped in brown paper, no name. I opened it slowly, not sure what to expect. Inside was a single inflatable gnome. Not one of the originals. A new one. With a note. It said, "Keep the party going. You earned it." No name. No signature. But I knew who it was from. Somehow, in her own strange way, Karen had left one last message. Maybe it was sarcastic. Maybe it was a truce. Maybe even she had come to realize that her obsession with control had only isolated her. Whatever it was, I placed the gnome at the edge of the pool, facing the water, and let it float. Weeks passed. The neighborhood stayed peaceful. No drama. No yelling. No lawsuits. Just people living. Laughing. Helping each other. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. And that was enough. Eventually, new neighbors moved into Karen's old house. A young couple with a toddler and a golden retriever. They brought over cookies the first week. The kid immediately fell in love with the gnome and named it Sir Splash. I didn't have the heart to explain its history. I just smiled and told him to keep it safe. Karen's legacy had been erased, not by revenge or paperwork, but by joy. By people choosing to be better. By a community that refused to be ruled by fear. And if she ever came back, if she ever tried again in some other town, some other HOA meeting, I hoped there'd be another neighbor like me. Someone willing to speak up. Laugh loud. Cannonball hard. Because sometimes, all it takes to defeat a tyrant is one unforgettable pool party. It began with a letter. A real one this time, not a note or a typed-up threat pretending to be anonymous. This was official. A white envelope slid under my door with a red wax stamp on the back, like we were in some Victorian drama. Inside, folded precisely, was a subpoena. Karen was suing me for defamation, emotional distress, and damage to her personal property, specifically 20 inflatable gnomes of sentimental value. I stared at the document for a full minute, wondering if this was real or some late April Fool's prank. Jake confirmed it was very real. And very stupid. But also dangerous, if handled the wrong way. Karen's lawsuit wasn't just a tantrum, it was a trap. She was hoping to drag me into court, turn everything into a public circus, and paint herself as the victim. In her twisted logic, the arrest at my pool party had ruined her reputation, the HOA scandal was just a smear campaign, and the gnome incident was a psychological attack. She wanted revenge. But more than that, she wanted control again. Jake said we could easily win the case, but he had a better idea, one that involved turning her attack into her downfall. So we decided to go through with the trial. Not to defend. To expose. The courthouse was small but packed. News had gotten out, thanks to the blogger who had made Karen infamous. People showed up in lawn chairs outside. Some wore shirts that said "Free the Gnomes." Someone had a pool float in the shape of a judge's gavel. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Karen sat at her table with a lawyer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I took my seat beside Jake, who had a stack of files, photos, and legal references like a soldier ready for battle. The trial opened with Karen's lawyer making a dramatic speech about a woman terrorized in her own neighborhood, publicly humiliated, digitally defamed, and robbed of her peace. Karen dabbed her eyes with a tissue, which might have worked if the judge hadn't already seen the viral video of her screaming at cops. When it was our turn, Jake stood up calmly and laid out the evidence with surgical precision. Video footage of Karen sneaking onto my property. Financial records of HOA misuse. Sworn testimony from neighbors about her harassment. And finally, a full psychological evaluation from a retired court-appointed therapist who once evaluated Karen during a prior dispute. That detail hit like a hammer. Karen exploded. She jumped up and shouted that this entire thing was a setup, that Jake was in love with me, that the judge was biased, that the court was corrupt. The bailiff had to ask her twice to sit down. She refused. She kept yelling. Until the judge held her in contempt and ordered her removed from the courtroom. The gavel hit like thunder. Karen was dragged out screaming, "You'll all pay for this. You'll see." After that, the rest was easy. The judge dismissed the case, declared her lawsuit frivolous, and issued a counterjudgment for my legal costs and damages. She was fined heavily. But more importantly, the court ruled that she was no longer permitted to hold any position within any homeowners association in the state. It should have ended there, but it didn't. Karen always had one more card to play. The following week, she showed up at the local news station, uninvited, during a live community report, and tried to hijack the microphone to declare her innocence. The reporter handled it like a pro, backing away while security escorted her off camera, but the clip went viral. Again. This time with the caption, "Karen goes live and loses it again." Karen had become an icon. Not a good one. She was a walking meme. Even late-night hosts picked it up. There was a sketch reenacting the entire pool party saga, complete with inflatable gnome puppets and a fake Karen chasing kids around with a clipboard. Kids at the local middle school started saying "Don't go full Karen" when someone overreacted. It became part of the culture. But while the world laughed, I still had to live next door to her. For a few days, she stayed locked in her house, blinds drawn, shades pulled. Then she started making strange moves. First, she listed her house for sale, but set the price at triple market value, clearly not planning to sell. Then she put up a sign that read "Private Property, Filming in Progress," even though no one was filming anything. Finally, she began parking her car directly in front of my driveway every morning, forcing me to use the back alley to get out. Jake called the police again. They issued warnings. She ignored them. Then came the restraining order, which she also ignored. It escalated to the point where we had to install cameras facing both our front yards, not for the HOA anymore, but for basic safety. One night, we caught her dragging a garbage bag full of what appeared to be leaves across my lawn, then dumping it on my porch. She was unraveling. Despite all of this, I decided to throw one more party. Not a loud one. Not a flashy one. Just a thank you gathering for the neighbors who stood by me. I called it the Peace Party, hoping to bring some calm after the chaos. I didn't send Karen an invitation. But that didn't stop her from showing up. Halfway through the evening, she marched into my backyard wearing a glittering dress, holding a plastic tiara on her head, and shouting about how this neighborhood used to be respectable. No one responded. Someone turned up the music slightly. A child offered her a cupcake, which she slapped out of his hand. That was the last straw. The police arrived within minutes, this time already expecting it. Karen was escorted out, still wearing the tiara, still declaring her dignity. After that, her house stayed dark. 4 days. Then weeks. Eventually, a moving truck appeared. I stood on the porch and watched from a distance. No one said goodbye. No one offered help. Karen didn't wave. She just sat in the front seat of the van, staring straight ahead, as if looking through everything and everyone. When the truck pulled away, there was silence. A kind of silence I hadn't felt in months. In the following weeks, things shifted. The HOA officially dissolved. The board disbanded. A few neighbors joked about starting a new association called the Not Karen Club. I donated my gnome army to the local school for their spring carnival. The kids loved them. My pool stayed open. The parties continued. But not wild ones. Just normal, joyful, neighborhood gatherings, where laughter didn't need permission slips and music didn't require a volume debate. Jake and I sat out one evening, watching the sun go down. He had taken a job nearby and moved into a place down the street. The block felt different now. Freer. More alive. You think she's really gone? He asked. I nodded. Physically, maybe. But emotionally? She left a scar. He laughed. Yeah. But we turned it into a tattoo. That night, I slept with the windows open. For the first time since the party, I wasn't worried about drama coming from the house next door. No screaming. No measuring tapes. No cops. Just crickets and the faint sound of water lapping in the pool. But somewhere deep in my chest, I knew this wasn't the final chapter. Karen had left. But people like her don't stay gone forever. They find new neighborhoods. New fences to patrol. New rules to abuse.